Hey, what's going on, guys? So, the live-action Spider-Man Noir series, which I guess is just called Spider-Noir, finally got a second trailer, and the internet is divided, because what else is new? Now, some of y'all aren't gonna like what I have to say. In fact, I don't think this is gonna be particularly popular with anyone, regardless of what side of the debate you're on, but I feel like the trailer for Spider-Noir really filtered out and categorized who's a fan of Spider-Man Noir and who's a fan of Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which I don't mean disparagingly. Spider-Man Noir, like the original Spider-Man Noir comic book series, is what, 8 issues? It's a very, very different take on the Spider-Man mythology, even down to Peter Parker not being able to web swing. I mean, he has webs, he just can't swing from them, so he basically just uses them as like wrist-mounted spider silk shooting sawed-off shotguns, when he's not actually shooting people with actual guns. But then we got Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, like the same year the second Spider-Man Noir miniseries concluded, and that game takes a lot of liberties with the character's mythology, all for the sake of gameplay, which, and I've said before, is totally fine for superhero games. As long as the gameplay is dynamic and fun, I genuinely could not care less how close you stay or how far you stray from the source material. And in the case of Shattered Dimensions, that game takes a lot of liberties with the source material, to the point where each dimension Spider-Man is basically just a heightened caricature of themselves. 2099 in Spider-Man Noir especially. But again, it was all for the sake of gameplay. So the fact that Spider-Man Noir was swinging and shooting little web balls and moving around like your pretty standard Spider-Man and fighting bad guys who are already dead in the comics it's a pretty big nothing burger, because it's a video game and it's fun, so who cares, right? Well, after Shattered Dimensions came out, everything that came afterwards that was adapting Spider-Man Noir basically just looked to Shattered Dimensions when adapting the character, as opposed to the comic books. Namely, Marvel's animated shows and Into the Spider-Verse. And because Marvel has no goddamn sense of creative integrity, and would happily kowtow to their movies and TV shows and video games to make the comics reflect them, as opposed to the other way around, Spider-Man Noir in the comics has basically now just become what he is in Into the Spider-Verse, which is Lord and Miller's very exaggerated take on the version of the character in the cartoons, which is basically just the version that you see from Shattered Dimensions. Which brings us all the way back to the upcoming Amazon Prime show featuring Nicolas Cage as Ben Reilly, I guess. Now, as far as that's concerned, I think the official explanation that was given for why Spider-Man Noir is Ben Reilly and not Peter Parker is really fucking stupid. Peter Parker's a kid and he's plucky and optimistic, and Ben Reilly's an adult because he's sad. Not even addressing the fact that the movie that got this whole Spider-Verse cinematic universe train running is literally built on the foundation of Peter Parker being old and depressed and handing the baton off to the next generation with Miles Morales. Like, that aside, that whole explanation just feels like Hollywood jargon for Spider-Man's wrapped up in a lot of weird legal technicalities, so Amazon actually can't call him Peter Parker or use the Spider-Man name, because that's really all that I hear when I read whatever the fuck this explanation's supposed to be. But everything else that we see in the show, like Spider-Man Noir swinging around through the city and all the superpowered bad guys that he's gonna fight, which, by the way, again, isn't a thing in the original Spider-Man Noir comics. Like, that comic took a very decisive approach in mirroring pulp hero comics from the 1930s, where the hero is the only supernaturally gifted figure in the story, but again, Shattered Dimensions didn't really give people that impression. So moving forward, just like any other Spider-Man, Spider-Man Noir is going to be out here fighting superpowered bad guys. And look, I'm not going to lie, the show does look cool, and you have Nicolas Cage just doing his Nicolas Cage thing, and it looks like what you would imagine a Nicolas Cage-led Spider-Man Noir series to look like. And it looks entertaining as hell, and it's very much doing its own thing with the mythology, which, again, I can totally understand if you watched Into the Spider-Verse and you liked the fun, kooky, Nazi bustin' cream soda drinking Uncle Nick from that movie, and that was your introduction to the character, I can totally see how this show would appeal to your sensibilities. However, specifically from this crowd, I'm seeing a lot of get over it nerd in relation to fans of the original comic book who are seeing this trailer going like, what the fuck is this? And again, I see both sides of it. Personally, I am a big fan of the original David Hine, Carmen DiGiandomenico series. I love how relentlessly miserable that comic is. I love how the Great Depression itself is a character within the series, and it's directly addressing the politics of the day. It's about the failure of Hoover's America. It's about crime and savagery being the true face of America, and how those at the very top of society realize that, and that's why they're at the top. Meanwhile, everyone else at the bottom is shackled to their idealism. It's about Peter Parker as this radical socialist champion of the oppressed who's trapped in this never-ending losing battle. Now, would I like to see an adaptation of that original take on Spider-Man Noir on film? Abso-fucking-lutely. But I have no illusions as to why that's not the case, especially from Amazon, why that's not gonna be the case, and why that's probably never going to be the case. And it does suck, knowing that this show will likely be the final nail in the coffin for there being any chance of seeing anything resembling the original Spider-Man Noir miniseries, and that we will never get anything like those first 8 issues with the character ever again. Because moving forward, it's just gonna be this. It's just gonna be the fun, palatable, flanderized caricature of Spider-Man Noir that we're gonna be getting from Marvel and all other adaptations in the future, as well as the comics, which I've long since made my peace with, as I've said before, my review for the original Spider-Man Noir series. But for people who aren't really into comics and more so, the cartoons and the video games and the movies, and the people who are excited for the upcoming show and are maybe confused and a little annoyed by the reluctance and negativity of comic book fans, I hope this video explains why. Because it's not an unfounded reluctance, I don't think. But those are just my thoughts. But what about you? What do you think of the show so far based off of the trailer? What do you think of the Spider-Man Noir comics and what they've sort of evolved into over the past 15 odd years? Let me know down below in the comment section, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.